So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today for Define Your Audience Now, Not Later. My name is Cassie Hoagland. I'm currently working for Blizzard Entertainment, and I'm excited to bring this information to you today. I have learned a lot at conferences and conventions over the last too many years, we'll say, and it's always a pleasure and a privilege to get the opportunity to give back and offer some information of my own. We'll take a moment for introductions. Again, my name is Cassie. I play, make, and market games, and I have for about 6 years now. Majora's Mask is number one in my heart and in reality. This is a hill that I will die on. If you disagree, I'm just going to say it's okay to be wrong. Please put cheese on everything. It's just the way to live. And if you didn't like whatever you were eating with cheese, it was the wrong cheese. It's not that fault. It's not its fault. And finally, this is kind of my philosophy for games. It's why I work in games. It's why I will continue to work in games. And it's helping you find your next favorite game. I'm sure everyone here has played enough games to really have that magical feeling of, I found something, this is for me, I feel like this is so special, and we deep dive and we become obsessive and we really get into something. The reason that I work in games is to help people find that feeling as often as possible. Now that you know a little bit about me, let's talk about what I would like you to take out of this talk. The first is the ability to analyze your competitive audiences. So be able to look at a game that you say, I want to make something like that, or this kind of reminds me of my concept, and figure out, did they successfully find their audience? Next, I'd like you to understand how to define your own audience and what that means. It's kind of in the title of the talk, and hopefully you'll be able to speak to that at the end. And finally, I'd like you to leave with some actionable steps to define your audience. I have been to many cons and conferences, and something that always frustrated me about the talks that I went to is that a lot of them were very beginner focused, very surface level, and although it was exciting to be in those talks and feel inspired, I would immediately feel lost as soon as I left the room, and I wasn't ever really sure how to take what I had just heard and put it into action. So in the content that I make, I try really hard to make sure that you do have actionable steps and it feels like you have a clear path forward for how to enact what you learned today. We're going to start with definitions, which feels kind of silly for something called defining your audience. So we are defining what defining your audience means, and it falls on these 4 pillars. Who is going to be most interested in your game? Who are your super fans? Who are the potential people who will deep dive into your lore, speed run your game, moderate your communities? Who are those people and where are they? We want to talk about the platforms that you are going to publish on. The console wars may be over in name, but there are still differences in the audiences for each of them. So where you publish matters. We're going to be concerned with competition. Is there any? And is the space viable? As well as feature sets. Different types of players expect different types of things in their games. And if you want to be innovative, that's great, but if you completely throw people out into left field, they may not like what they paid for. Next, I want to talk about what I call the trap, which I see a lot in the indie space as much as I do love the indie space. Getting lucky is not a strategy. We cannot rely on if we build it, they will come. There are many amazing games that nobody has seen in the world because we are not focused on making sure that the right people find our products. And to put this into perspective, as you can see, 11,000 games were published on Steam just last year, and that's just Steam. What about consoles? What about other PC platforms? What about mobile? What about any free game anywhere on the internet? So we have a lot of competition, and that number is only going up every single year. We do not have the luxury as people who want people to find us to just make something and then set it adrift without a direction. So we need to understand that although marketing can be intimidating, that maybe it's not really our jam, we want to focus on our art, it's all understandable, but that it's just not advisable anymore. But some people here might be thinking, my game is amazing though. If I just make it, I know people will find it. And I want to challenge that mindset because I'm sure your game is amazing. And the people who do find it might enjoy it. But let's just talk about this slide for a second. Are you a game developer? You're here, you're in this room, which means that you have an all-access pass to GDC. I would hedge my bets and say that you are either a game developer already, or you are aspiring to be one. And in either case, defining your audience helps you discover the purpose of your IP. Is it art? Is it a commercial product? Is it a personal project? Whatever the purpose is, knowing that is important. So we're gonna say yes, you are a game developer. Next, do you want players for your game? Much like filmmakers want people to watch their movies and authors want people to read their books, we as game developers want players for our game. That's how they consume our art and our creativity. So we want to prioritize our game's features to match expectations and give a little bit of razzle-dazzle sometimes, but most of the time we want to make sure we're meeting players where they are. So yes, we do want players. And finally, money, question mark? This can just be any compensation. It doesn't have to be dollars. It doesn't have to be currency in that way. It could also be reputation. It could be exposure, the infamous exposure that doesn't pay our bills, but maybe gets us some name recognition. What are your business objectives? If it's not money, that's fine. But you still want players, right? You're still making something, right? And you want people to see it. So we need to understand what our business objectives are in order to really make sure that the product is making its way to who it needs to. Now that I have kind of rambled on about that for a minute, let's do an exercise. We love hypotheticals here. So I want you to imagine all of the gamers in all of the world. We can quibble about what a gamer is, but whatever that means to you, just imagine all of them. Now we're gonna limit that just to the people who play RPGs. It's kind of a big subcategory, almost not a subcategory, but it's still there. Now let's talk about narrative-driven RPGs. It's a little bit more narrow. What if it's a roguelike? And it has stylized graphics. That bit right there, where the Venn diagram overlaps, is what I like to refer to as the market sweet spot. This is where the superfans live. This is where the speedrunners, the community moderators, all of the people who want to know you and are living inside your game live. Don't say anything out loud. This does represent a game, and I want you to think about what game this might be. I'll give you a second. Surprise, it's Hades. Disclaimer, I have never worked on Hades. This is a market pull example where I want to show you that even though I've never worked on Hades, we can still talk about their success in regards to audience definition. So let's look at the Steam tags. These are player-driven for the most part, and the players have identified Hades as an RPG, a roguelike, with a rich story, it's hand-drawn, and it's isometric. You might notice some similarities between these words and the Venn diagram that I just showed you. The developer keywords, in other words, ways that the dev team refers to Hades in official communications, things like the storefront, press releases, trailers, use words like this: roguelike, rich atmosphere, character-driven storytelling. Again, you might notice some similarities. The developer of Hades refers to Hades in the same terms that the players do. This is an agreement on what kind of game Hades is. It means that the developers of Hades were making this game and went, who is this for? Well, it's for these players, the ones that found it. They did a good job. Good for them. And we know they did a good job, right? I heard some chuckling. Some people guessed the right game. And we know that Hades had some good news last year. So let's try again. Again, all gamers in all the world. But now we're going to look at shooters. Another big category. Fantasy shooters. Now we get a little interesting. What if it's magic instead of guns? I want to be able to shoot fireballs and boulders instead of guns. And we get those stylized graphics again. Once again, this is our market sweet spot. Think. Any ideas? Don't say anything on what game this might be. It's Spellbreak. Spoiler, I did work on Spellbreak for quite some time, so this one is a little near and dear to my heart. I did work on the marketing for this game. It was a ton of fun. But let's do the same thing. The Steam tags: shooter, third-person shooter, magic, RPG, stylized. The developer keywords in official communications: battle royale, fantasy, battle mage, RPG, stunning graphics. We can see once again an alignment, an agreement on what Spellbreak is between the developers and the people that the dev team was trying to reach, the people who ultimately play Spellbreak. Well, Cassie, that's all well and good, but how does audience definition help create success? There has to be an end goal. There has to be a positive result. Well, some of you might have seen Hades made a big announcement at the end of last year. There's going to be a sequel, a huge achievement for any game. Now it's officially a franchise. That's very exciting. And this particular screenshot was taken quite a bit ago at this point. But you can see it's got tons of engagement, and I would wager this is going to be one of the most anticipated indie early accesses of this year. Very exciting, and this is commercial success. Next, we're going to look a little more close to home. This is a GIF, and it's kind of a fun GIF. Spellbreak was very focused on community and connecting with players. This is something that was made in-house by the team, and if you've never played Spellbreak, don't worry, I can introduce you. This is Thaddeus. He is a general NPC who leads a charge of rebels against a fascist state. He is buff, he is strong, he is charismatic, and colloquially referred to by Spellbreak players as Thaddy Daddy. We love him, and he is Thaddy Daddy forever. If you were to go onto Giphy and use the keyword peeking, Thaddeus comes up. And he's been on there for quite a while now. This GIF has over 8 million views. And when it was first published on Giphy for months, was outperforming similar peeking GIFs. Oh no, go back. Similar peeking GIFs with the likes of George Clooney, Jim Carrey, Kim Kardashian, and to this day, if you were to go on Giphy and look up peeking, Thaddeus is there within the top 10 to 20 GIFs. So it's a lot of longevity. It's feeding into the culture of the players and giving them something fun that they enjoy, and getting a lot of notice and a lot of traction out of a simple but fun GIF. So we've done a lot of talking about hypotheticals, defining things, but I did promise you actionable steps at the beginning of this talk, so let's go through them. Step 1, game design document. These are a matter of debate within the game dev community, I understand that. I fall firmly in the camp of you may not think you need it, but I would highly recommend it, especially if you are early on in your development career. These are just 4 categories that a game design document allows you to explore and kind of flesh out: plot, gameplay, publishing, and marketing, and your visual style. You may remember in our examples, these types of features come up a lot in player tags and developer keywords. So knowing what these are is going to help you speak to and define your game for players. And it's just a sacred text for your whole team, filled with key information about your development process, the why for your game, where you're going with it, and what the key pillars are. It's something you can keep referring back to when you're 5 years into development and you're starting to really wonder how much you want this. Step 2, market research. I know this sounds kind of scary to people who aren't working in marketing and you really want to focus on building. I get it, but we're simplifying it for you today with 4 major questions. Anybody can ask these questions, and I have total faith that everybody in this room can answer them with a little bit of work about their own games. Question 1, is there an existing market? You're making a platformer. Do platforms exist? Yes, they do. In what form do they exist? These are the types of things that you should ask yourself when you're thinking, how does my game and my idea fit into the market? If you can answer this one question in a comprehensive way, congratulations, your investor pitches just leveled up. They're going to want to know the answer to this question. Grant people are going to want to know the answer to this question, and you need to have it for them. It's going to make your pitches that much better. Second question, what are the common features? We're going to go back to the platformer. What kind of features do platformers have in general? Are you going to incorporate those, and to what extent? Knowing what the common features are allows you to anticipate your player needs. And you've probably heard this phrase already so far this week, but you can't break the rules unless you know the rules. So figure out what the rules of your genre are. Even if you play a lot of games, whatever you're making, study the competition, because we all have our own tastes, we all have our own biases. Try the ones that you haven't played and really figure out what's common and what players are going to expect when they boot up your game for the first time. Third, who stands out? There are probably going to be big fish in the space that have a lot of the market share for your genre. Who are they? What are they doing? Is it a game feature thing that makes them successful? Is it a marketing thing that makes them successful? Did they just get in at the right time? If you can figure those things out, and for the most part, I think that they're pretty clear, you're going to understand your competition, which allows you to better pitch yourself or your game against them. And I don't mean to make that sound combative or competitive, but when we're talking about market share and the amount of time that players have to put into games, sometimes it is. And finally, where are the communities? I cannot tell you how many indie devs I have met or I have worked with who do not know where to put themselves online. They are overwhelmed by the number of social platforms, and they're like, I gotta be on all of them, and how am I supposed to do that? It's so much time to make all these assets and comment on everything and come up with copy. The secret, I think, is that you don't have to do that. If you can identify where your target audience is, where they congregate outside of games, then you know where to be. Do they go to Reddit and that's where they talk to each other? You should be on Reddit. Do they go to Discord and congregate there? You should go to Discord. Or do they just like to be on Twitter and engage with brands that way? Focus on that then. It's not that difficult. It just sounds scary and it sounds intimidating. But I promise just a little bit of research is going to make this a lot easier for you. And step 3, tone and voice. So you know who you want to talk to. You've figured out these demographics, what the average age might be, what their player type might be, if they have genre preferences, existing habits, like they binge play on the weekends or they play on the bus on the way to work. You know where they live. So you're looking into localization, and if you might need that. You know what kind of news outlets they'd be interested in reading from, so maybe you could reach out and do some PR, and you've decided what your release platforms are going to be. Well, why are you going to talk to them? Is it just informative? Are you looking to build a community? Are you going to roast them and be a Wendy's in the gaming space? That's a legitimate question, by the way. I've seen gaming companies do that. But if you know the answers to these questions, which hopefully with step 1 and step 2, you've at least answered most of these questions, you can figure out how to talk to them. Are you going to use the word yeet when you are talking to a retirement target audience and you're trying to get them to play a mobile game? Probably not. And knowing how they want to be talked to is going to help you talk to them in a way that resonates. Because if you speak to them in a way that they don't understand and they don't get it, not only are they not going to give your game a chance, but they're probably going to report your post. These 3 steps give us access to multiple returns, the first of which is your active marketing. If you find yourself with a budget, hooray, you have a budget. How are you going to spend it? Active marketing is your paid time, your ads, your influencers, etc. So this is what that gives you. Now you know who to target with your ads. You can figure out which influencer communities you're interested in being exposed to your product. Retargeting, if you have a newsletter, if you have pre-registrations, this is all going to go better. Potentially a higher conversion rate because you're now speaking to a community of people that you have put in the time and the work to identify as interested in what you have to offer. You can leverage lookalike communities. Hey, my game seems a lot like that game, or at least the players of that game I think would be really interested in my game. And if that's the case, maybe I can leverage my ads and my content to people who kind of represent or mimic that community. And you're going to reach those relevant recipients. So people who want to see more of your content, people who are more likely to click your ad and see what you're about. And you're not going to get people going, what is this? I don't want to see this, and taking a negative action after seeing your content. And the last thing that we're going to take out of all of these steps and efforts is your learnings over time. You have taken the time, you've put in the effort to say, why am I doing this at all? Why am I making this? And what do I want out of it? This is going to inherently inform your decisions throughout development, and because you've documented it, it's going to help you explain the decisions later on. When you look back, it's not going to be buried in a Slack channel or in a DM or be something that you just decided off of the cuff, and you're not going to have any recollection of why something was done. Your data-driven pivots. We've talked a lot about researching, gathering information. That's data, and it'll help you to make the pivots that you need to be more successful, which means, as you can see, you can decipher the patterns. Have you cut things from one section too much? Are you prioritizing something too much? Is your scope too large? Scope creep is a problem, and it's difficult to see sometimes unless you have that history. Offering top-down transparency, both to your team and to players, is something that marketing teams fight for every day. Just, please, legal, can I have a little more transparency? And having that, offering that as a developer, a studio founder, a director, not only gives you insight into accountability for decisions, but offering credit to people who make contributions to your game. That leads to job satisfaction and trust, and really just makes a better studio and a better team for everyone. With all these recorded experiences, congratulations, you are now smarter and more prepared to go on to your next project, regardless of how your current project goes. Whether it was a resounding success or it didn't quite work out, You've done all this. You know this. It's familiar. and you can take it on with you to the next project and have it be quicker, easier, and more effective. Now we're going to zoom out. We started with defining your audience and what that means. Well, you got 3 steps: your game design document, your market research, and your tone and voice, which gives you all of these great benefits. These aren't the only benefits, but they are the only ones I could fit inside this shape. All of these benefits lead to the ultimate goal, I guess, not to be redundant, of learnings and goals, hopefully meeting those goals. I'd like to offer you some resources. These are ones that I have found personally helpful. Disclaimer, these are not endorsed by Blizzard. These are ones that I personally, as a game dev, am offering to you. The Craft and Science of Game Design by Phil O'Connor is probably in the bookstore here this week. It's a book that I own, and it's what I used to make my own game design document for my own project. Understandably, the books are expensive. If that's not an option for you, GameDevBeginner.com has a great template that you could use. From market research, Chris Zukowski and Victoria Tran, if you are somehow unfamiliar with both of these names, I highly recommend getting familiar and signing up for the newsletters that they offer. You can find information from pure beginner to advanced from both of them, and you're going to have kind of a finger to the pulse of what's going on the market, especially with Steam, with Chris's newsletter. And for tone and voice, I know Udemy is kind of a hit or miss, really, when it comes to classes, but this business branding with personality class by Steve Harangan is one that I took, and I found it incredibly helpful in providing language, in particular for sharing that language with my team on who are we as a brand and who are we talking to. I think it really helps to simplify and visualize in a classical sense who the brand is and how you differentiate that from the team, TM, and it's really helpful. So back to the takeaways. I hope, now that we're here, that you feel comfortable in the process of auditing a game for successful audience definition. I also hope at this point that you understand what defining an audience means, and that you understand why it's important, not just in general, but for you. And finally, that you can start on at least one of these 3 steps soon, today, now, and that you feel comfortable and you feel enabled to do that. Well, thank you. And, if you want to talk or engage or whatever later, I'm Awesome Hylian on Twitter and most places online. If you like reading, I am obsessed. You can find me on TikTok under Cassa's Bookshelf. And if you want to know my 2 cents on games, you can look up my website, Indie Horde. But thank you all for coming, and I hope that you've gotten some good things out of the talk. Seems like maybe we have some time. If anybody has any questions, we've got like 4 minutes.
Shout.
It's on.
Oh, is it on?
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, great, we got it. Dennis over at HitSense, marketing manager. So we have a fast-paced FPS roguelike coming out this year.
Okay.
And we have the game dev who has a pre-established community of, early access players, and they have very much, their own culture and their own, way of communicating, like you've discussed. However, in order for us to, justify a commercial success, that needs to broaden, hence the audience will broaden. And so how would you go about bridging the gap between, say, the pre-established early access community, right, and sort of the mainstream community that needs to be sort of integrated as we continue to market and bring in more attention for the game?
Okay, so the question is, how do you bridge the gap between an established community and reaching new audiences? I think that's a great question, especially if you have a really passionate base already. They want to be the ones that you talk to. I would say look at a different platform than what you're currently reaching that core audience on. Whatever that is, look to expand in a place that they are not. That way, it's something totally different, and you can target your content in a different way so that they aren't sitting on every single post wondering, why are you saying this to me? I already know that. And TikTok might actually be a good place to do that. This side.
Hello, Daniel Marcus, game designer from Off-World Industries. Let's say, hypothetically of course, that you've already fallen into what you call the trap. What would one do differently in order to assess the audience that you already have and maybe continue to expand it?
Yeah, so the question is, if we're already in the spot of if we build it, they will come, how do you move past that, even with an established community? I mean, the reason that this talk is titled Define Your Audience Now, Not Later is that I think you can do that at any time. And whatever your current audience is can feed into what you do in these steps. So you can look at who is already playing the game, how they interact with the game. I'm sure there's some play testing and feedback loops that you've already done. You can look at that and extrapolate from it. I would say that despite the advice to not go into the trap, if you have been documenting what you've been doing with your players up until this point, you have so much data to pull from already in order to look at where your current players are operating online, what other games they play, and if they trust you, you have access to them to ask them these questions and get that information without starting from scratch.
Thank you.
Hello. It sounds like this is a talk that's very indie focused, which means we can't make any assumptions about the size of the team or the number of hats that people are wearing. But just focusing on the documentation itself, I was wondering if one of the things that it seems like you had talked nearby several times, but not directly at, was personas, client personas, user personas. And I was wondering where within the framework that you usually work with, would you see personas? What complementary tools nearby help you get the best value out of that? Like where does that fit into your overall documentation and product strategy?
Okay, so the question, and correct me if I'm wrong, is when it comes to dealing with personas and documentation, where do the personas fit in with this, and what kinds of tools might we use to incorporate personas into the documentation?
Yes, what are the other things that you've seen, other tools that help you get the most value out of those tools, out of personas?
So the personas are in themselves a type of tool. It's kind of like a marketing personality test almost. And I think when it comes to incorporating those into your documentation, it's not so much an add-on, it's a foundational piece. So you're going to want to look for something to manipulate the personas within your documentation rather than use the personas to manipulate whatever else you have in there. If you're saying that you're talking to a hero or an explorer, that is a foundational aspect of the audience you're trying to reach. So when I am, for instance, setting up, like, who are we talking to, here's a tone and voice pitch, I'm going to extrapolate on, say, the explorer archetype and say, these are the types of things that they like. These are the types of activities that they're interested in and their motivation for playing a game. How can we tie that into our feature set? And is that represented in our feature set? And you can leverage that to pitch to product or to anybody on dev side and say, look, this is who we really think is going to be plugged in, and we need to speak to why they are plugged in. So it's really a leveraging tool to help you make the argument for kind of a marketing-driven change to the game.
I've seen personas talked about in context of a value proposition outside of games.
And I assume that when, in the context of the design document you were talking about, maybe they could tie directly to your pillars, your design pillars that you're establishing?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I was just curious if there's a direct link, what that might, yeah.
I mean, the direct link is, it's however direct you want it to be. It's really just a matter of how close you want those things to be, or if you want it to be kind of a side, nice to have sort of thing.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any more? Is there time for one more? Yes? One more, then,
Okay,
please.
hi. I'm Justine. I'm a product manager, and I work for a small indie studio in LA. I was happy to see Victoria Tran on your slide because I'm a huge fan. I was in her talk earlier. Just using her content and her lessons have actually grown our TikTok to over 180K
Wow.
followers in 4 months. So I'm really proud of that. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the potential TikTok ban, and you said to focus, you don't have to focus on everything, you can just focus on one platform. But now there's all this worry, and there's a lot of messaging out there saying we need to diversify. What are your feelings on like full steam ahead on just TikTok, or maybe shifting a little to YouTube based on current events?
Yeah, so the question is, we have an established community on one platform. How do we feel about diversification when you're being told to diversify versus just really doubling down on one platform? It sounds like you've had a lot of success on TikTok. That's very exciting. Before you diversify, quote unquote, you should consider who you're trying to reach, because wherever you do diversify needs to match who you want to reach. And if the people that you are saying this is our core audience, if their primary social platform is TikTok, like at a certain point in development, of course you want to be everywhere. But when you're building that initial community and you want to say this is our hub, this is where we are, I would hesitate to recommend that be everywhere. So I would say look at the other platforms. Maybe the closest in demographic would be Instagram to TikTok, especially if people are really enjoying your visual video footage. And you can more easily repurpose TikTok content for something like Reels or even YouTube Shorts if you want to go that way. But don't just blindly start investing in another platform without confirming that the audience you want to reach is there. I know it's scary and there's a lot of information coming from different directions, but to go back to the idea of you're everywhere and so you're nowhere, make sure that you're going to still reach people that you want to reach before you do that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, we are out of time, everybody. Thank you again.